Hi there, I'm Danielle Ofri. I'm a doctor, I'm a writer, and I'm the editor-in-chief of BLR, the Bellevue Literary Review. This is a literary journal that we publish that's about fiction, poetry, and nonfiction about health and healing. And we invite all of you to read it, and I'm here today to talk about a very special event that BLR is hosting in collaboration with Medscape next week. On Tuesday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. EST, I'll be hosting a conversation with two very special doctor writers, Abraham Verghese and Eric Topol. And our topic is COVID Writing Goes Viral, How Literary and Social Media Became a Lifeline During the Pandemic. And if you remember, if you were around during the whole year of the pandemic, that writing really took off, both social media and literary writing. And partly it was an incredible medical and scientific lifeline as information went back and forth on Twitter, on Facebook to help out doctors and scientists, but also literary writing. People wrote from their hearts about their experiences, both healthcare workers and patients and families who really came to rely on social media to stay in touch. And so next week we'll have a conversation about this topic. Tickets are free and we hope you'll come get one. The URL is tinyURL at BLRViral. That's tinyURL BLRViral, and that's Tuesday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. EST, which is 4 p.m. for those of you on the West Coast. If you don't know Abraham Verghese, he's really one of my favorite writers. His day job is a professor of medicine and vice chair at Stanford. But his first book, My Own Country, was transformational for me. He wrote about his experience as a young ID physician, infectious disease, in small-town America during the height of the AIDS epidemic, and it really changed my life as a physician and as a writer. He also wrote a phenomenal best-selling novel called Cutting for Stone. And when I love a nonfiction writer, I'm always hesitant to read their novels because maybe they'll be terrible, but this was fantastic. It's 500 pages long, but the minute you finish, you'll go back to the beginning and start again like I did. So I highly recommend Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. And he also has a new novel in the pipeline, so congratulations for all of us who are big Abraham Verghese fans. Also next week, in our conversation will be Eric Topol. His day job is a cardiologist running the Scripps Translational Research Institute, but he has kind of a side hustle, as my teenage son would say, not just as the editor-in-chief of Medscape, but as a phenomenal social media star, a very unlikely one. But his Twitter account became one of the most trusted sources for reliable scientific information during the pandemic. He now has almost 400,000 followers, and most of us find his information the best way to understand the latest that's happening. And he's not yet doing TikTok videos, but maybe soon. And his most recent book is Deep Medicine, about the role of artificial intelligence in medicine. Again, I'm Danielle Ofri. I'm editor-in-chief of BLR. I'm a doctor and writer, and I'll be hosting Abraham Verghese and Eric Topol next Tuesday. And they're two of the smartest, most interesting people I know, and so I'm sure you will enjoy the conversation. The premiere will be on Tuesday, March 23rd, 7 p.m. EST. COVID Writing Goes Viral, and it will be shown on the BLR YouTube channel. You can get your free tickets at tinyURL BLRViral. And there, as I said, there's been a ton of writing about the pandemic. It's really inspired, I think, so much in us. And as it has for other pandemics in the past. I mean, think about the plague, the writing from that, the Spanish flu, and from the AIDS epidemic. There's been quite a bit of writing. And right now for the BLR, we're busy reading manuscripts for the next issue, and there is a ton of incredible and quite deep writing about the COVID pandemic, and I'm excited for that issue to come out. And actually in our spring issue, was coming up soon, has a number of excellent pieces about the pandemic. Again, this is the journal BLR, Bellevue Literary Review, and our website is blreview.org, and you can read lots of writing or you can pick up a copy. And I'm the chief editor, and I wanted today to read to you two short pieces about the pandemic. One is an article that I wrote for The New Yorker about our experience at Bellevue with the pandemic, and the second will be a poem. So I'm a primary care doctor at Bellevue, and last spring, exactly a year ago, in March, was really the beginning of all of this, and you may all remember how heavily New York was hit. And in the beginning, of course, we didn't really know what was going on. And it was, a quite unexpected time. And Bellevue, you may have heard of it. It has a reputation that often precedes itself, but it's the oldest public hospital in the country. It's been around since 1736. And the thing about Bellevue is its doors have always been open to all for the last 3 centuries. And so when the pandemic hit, we, of course, as all hospitals in New York, got hit very hard. But that's part of what makes it a very interesting and amazing place to work. And last March, when I think back to that time, it was a moment where every day was twice as much as the day before, both in heft and in volume and in new things. And every day was kind of rebuilding the ship that you were in. And I think that it was nothing short of miraculous how the doctors and nurses and administrators of the hospital and of all hospitals in New York, around the country and the world really came together. And it was this sort of very, a lot of it's been written, I think, about that part of the pandemic, that sort of frenzied upslope of creating things on the fly. The part I'm going to read to you is about what came next, sort of what some people call the peak, or after the sort of every day is different. And this is from an article from the New Yorker. It's entitled A Doctor's Pandemic Diary, and it was published in October. The one term that comes up in this little excerpt that maybe non-medical folks won't recognize is rapid response. And rapid response, if you've watched any medical dramas, Code Blue, it's kind of like that when a patient acutely is near death's door. And it could be from anything, cardiac arrest, but in this case, during COVID, whenever a rapid response comes overhead, it's someone whose breathing is failing, is going to get intubated. So the rapid responses that kept pounding overhead were this visceral reminder of how many patients were struggling. In mid-April, the sprint that began in March, the race to open ICU beds, to conjure up more medicine teams, recruit additional nurses, that gives way to a sustained slog of sickness. The excitement of building the airplane while flying it has waned. It's just keep doing what you're doing. The total number of coronavirus patients in the hospital remains stuck in the 300s, edging close to 400 on Easter Sunday. The medical ICU service, which normally cares for about a dozen patients, powers through these grueling days with as many as 110 patients. Rapid response alerts churn from the PA system overhead, unceasing gut punches. This doesn't feel like a peak or even a plateau. It's more like an abyss. Then, in the 3rd week of April, the total number of COVID patients eases below 300 and the ICU census dips below 100. The boot seems to lift, if only slightly. What emerges isn't relief exactly, but a welter of fractured emotions. Up until this point, we've been urgent, focused, determined. Now, in the waning days of April, it's as though we're suddenly seeing what is happening around us and to us. In hallway conversations, colleagues begin to talk about anxieties and nightmares. Some people agonize whether they've done enough. Others berate themselves for putting their families at risk. Those who are rotated off service feel uneasy about returning to civilian life. Family issues, shunted aside in the pandemic whirlwind, suddenly become visible, sandbars revealed when the tide goes out. Our apartments look like Chernobyl. We discover that our teens have fallen cripplingly behind in their remote schooling, that our young kids now rally to the other parent. Long-suffering spouses are bitter, tired of sublimating everything on behalf of the healthcare hero who gets to escape the domestic dungeon every day. We discover colleagues who've been suffering in silence, edged with PTSD-like symptoms. Others, having decamped to hotels to protect their families, now find the separation more than they can bear. Amid the unveiled pain, we pause to take stock of the monumental achievement of our hospital, and in all hospitals in the city. Listen, grousing about administration, that is in healthcare workers' DNA. I mean, it really did take 2 years to get a staff water cooler. But the steadying hospital leadership, the rapid-fire mobilization, and the collective commitment we witnessed have awed even the most jaded of Bellevue lifers. And yet, our pride is hung heavy with heartache. 15,000 New Yorkers have died. 200,000 have fallen ill. So many of our patients are still suffering. Everyone knows someone who's been affected. There's no vaccine and no safe harbor in sight. And that was our bleak sentiment that we were all feeling at that time, around the end of April, before the June and July easing off. And I think there has been a lifting of mood lately, which, I share. I mean, the vaccine makes things really exciting. And I certainly encourage you to get your vaccine if you haven't yet. But we're not out of the woods yet. Even if we're near the end or the final lap, there's still a long way to go. As a primary care doctor, I see my patients getting sick from COVID every single day, and many are still dying. The prevalence in the population is so high now that the actual numbers of people affected is sadly still very high. So maybe we're close to the final lap. We're not out of the woods yet. So please use your mask, social distance, and get that vaccine. Just a reminder, I'm Danielle Ofri. I'm a doctor, a writer, and editor-in-chief of BLR, the Bellevue Literary Review. And I'm inviting you to a special event next week, COVID Writing Goes Viral, with Abraham Verghese and Topol. It will be on Tuesday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. EST, 4 p.m. for those of you on the West Coast, on the BLR YouTube channel. And you can get the link by RSVPing, tickets are free, at tinyURL BLRViral. And I'd like to close from reading a poem from BLR, from the Bellevue Literary Review. And the reason I'm choosing a poem is that poetry can often capture the essence of a moment. The kind of moment that takes us prose writers 4,000 words to capture. The economy and the imagery of poetry, not to mention its accessibility, is one of the reasons that poetry is one of the things that we humans turn to during moments of vulnerability. And if you remember Amanda Gorman's poem at the presidential inauguration, you've had a taste of the power of poetry. So this poem is entitled Evocation Streets, and I chose it because it makes me think of what the streets of New York City were like during the March and April of last year. Evocation Streets by Jeanette, Clough. I am surrounded by streets, half dark, half lit, by high-rises sheathed in metal and glass, and marbled with neon-veined red. The city's bodies full of miracles and sad majesty, drunk from 24-hour light, so much cast onto familiar sidewalks, where I, among the arcades, the eloquent columns grown from asphalt, among the sirens, am lost. That's Evocation Streets by Jeanette, Clough. And for me, she captures the emptiness, the sadness of the streets, the sirens that race through, and how we all felt lost in that. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Danielle Ofri, editor of BLR and a doctor and writer, and I'm inviting you to a special event next week, COVID Writing Goes Viral, with Abraham Verghese and Topol. It is on Tuesday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. EST on the BLR YouTube channel, and you can RSVP for a free ticket at tinyURL BLRViral. Thank you so much for all of you who joined. I see from all over the country and all over the world. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. If you want to know more about BLR, our website is blreview.org. And this event is co-hosted with Medscape, which is a wonderful source for medical information and great articles. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week at the event. Bye now.